Almost always in your paintings, the two biggest mistakes you want to look for when you're establishing your values is my sky light enough or is it too dark? And are the highlights of my trees too light? Basically, what the concept of angles and consequent values is that the angle that something is to the source of light will determine its value. And let me explain. So what is the source of light for us people here on this planet? It's the sun, okay? So there's the sun right there. Here's the earth. Of course, the sun's a lot bigger than the earth, and then the sun's shining down on the earth like that. Keep that in mind. Now, let's say you have something flat, like the ground, and the sun shines down on that. Because this flat surface is facing directly toward the sun, it's going to have a lighter value than if you had something that was slanted and facing toward the sun. So let me take this now and slant it. So let's say you have something, a plane that's slanted. Because this is slanted now somewhat a bit away from that direct light that was coming down. Okay, so the flat surface is getting the full brunt of sunlight here. But this is starting to slant a little bit away from that direct sunlight coming down. That's going to get darker in value. So that's a slant. So that's going to be a darker value than the ground plane, than something that's flat. And then let's say you have something that's upright. And let's say you're standing here and you're looking at it. And you're looking at this thing, that's your eyesight. And then you have the sun coming down. This part right here that I'm pointing to, that plane, it's illuminated by the sun, but because the sun's coming straight down, it's not getting nearly as much sunlight because it's tilted, away from the direct source of light hitting it. If the sun were over here, then it would hit that surface and be a lot lighter in value. But because the sun is above it and it comes down, this plane right here is going to be darker. So going back to this box, if you were able to helicopter around this whole, let's say this is just a cube, okay, that we're looking at. This plane right here is going to be dark, a lot darker than this plane right here. The top of it is getting the full brunt of sunlight. So that's going to be very light. But usually you're not going to see that because you're down here. So let's translate this to a landscape. And this is what Carlson was talking about. So that is the general principle of angles and consequent values. And by the way, that principle holds true not just in sunlight. So let's say we have a landscape. What Carlson was talking about is that in most landscapes, you can break it down into 4 value planes. A light, and then kind of a medium light, and then like a medium dark. I can't remember if this is his exact terms, and then your dark. All right, so that you have like number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So those are the concepts that you have. Those are the 4 different value planes you have in a landscape. Light, slightly darker, a medium light, medium dark, and then dark. What is the lightest plane in a landscape?
Sky.
Sky. Bingo. Sky is number 1. Almost always. There are caveats, as I talked about earlier with the storm clouds and that. Why is the sky the lightest? Because it's the light source. On an overcast day, it's still the light source. And even on a sunny day, you actually have 2 light sources on a sunny day. You have the sunlight, which is the brightest, and then you have the blue sky, which is also illuminating the landscape, but it's quite a bit weaker and it's a lot cooler. That's why your shadows look cooler on a sunny day. Why they look bluer, because it's the blue skylight illuminating them. But in most cases, your sky is going to be the lightest value plane. What's the medium light or the next darkest? Going down, our number 2.
Ground plane.
It's going to be the ground plane. The reason why? Because the light source, which is the sky, is bam, hitting that with all it's got. Because the ground plane is facing directly towards it. What's our next darkest part?
The angle.
Slanting.
Slants, which is going to generally be hills.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're not getting the full brunt of this light coming down. They're starting to angle away from it. So they appear a little bit darker. That's the key to showing hills and things like that in your landscape, is you want to paint them a little bit darker than the ground plane. There's subtleties to that, and we talked about that in past workshops and that, but that's the general concept. And then what is the darkest plane in the landscape?
The uprights.
The uprights, which generally consists of
Trees.
trees. Yes. So we have a tree, and there's our tree. And because now there's a caveat to this. The reason why is because when you look at a tree, you're about this tall. You might be even shorter. Some of those trees can get pretty big. And so when you look at this tree, what part are you seeing? You're seeing all of this part here. Depending on how far away you are. If you're standing further back, you're going to see more of this business. If you're standing up close to it, you're going to see more of this part that's slanting down at you. So this is an upright. So this whole side of the tree is generally going to be darker than your hill, and definitely darker than your ground plane, and definitely darker than your sky. Big time. Even the illuminated parts, even the sunlit parts, because in this you're going to have little areas of light and shadow. But Carlson, and he was dead right on this, in most cases, nothing in this tree should ever be as light as the ground plane, and definitely not as light as the sky. Once again, there's caveats. Autumn is a big one. You have like aspen trees that turn a very light yellow. We're talking summertime, local, summertime general sunny day type stuff, okay? So even your highlights here, because they're still on the side of the tree, they're still on that side plane, even the sunlit parts are going to appear darker than this. Also, your shadows on your ground plane, you want a trick to make your shadows look natural on the ground plane. Make sure that the shadows, the cast shadows on your ground plane, do not get as dark as the shadows on your tree, even if you think they are. Start out with them lighter in value, and they'll look like they're on the ground. That's where most people screw up. When you go into like Michael's, and when they used to have AC Moore, they had this too, and you'd see the Bob Ross painting classes they had there. I see this all the time. And they constantly blow out of the water the angles and consequent values thing. There's two major mistakes they all make. The first one is they make their skies way too dark, and they make their highlights on their trees way too light. Guaranteed, they'll take like pure cad lemon, and they'll just take the old fan brush and they'll stipple that cad lemon right on that tree and just lighten the crap out of it. And then they'll have this dark, cobalt blue or ultramarine blue or Prussian blue right out of the tube, and we'll just mix it in there, and, because we want a nice blue sky, and it just all falls apart. So almost always in your paintings, the two biggest mistakes you want to look for when you're establishing your values is my sky light enough, or is it too dark? And are the highlights of my trees too light? Those are the two biggest things that'll screw up more landscapes than anything else. Carlson said this too, than anything else you'd ever see. Which is why you want to establish what's kind of called a value map. So when I approach a painting, a landscape painting, the first things I'm doing is, unless there's caveats to it, am I falling within this? I'm going to block in usually my darkest darks first, and they're almost always going to be right around here on the dark parts of those trees. If you have bushes, they might be right down there in those bushes too, especially if they're close to you. That's going to be usually my darkest darks. Then I'm going to build out there, but not get too much lighter with my highlights. And then I'm going to put in my ground plane. And I want to make sure that my ground plane is lighter than any of the highlights in here. And if I can't get light enough, it means that I might be too light in my tree with my highlights. And then I'm going to put in the sky last. I'm going to key in the sky to everything else. because I used to start with the sky, almost always painted my skies too dark. I saved the skies for last. In the block-in stage, so I block in from the foreground, from the darkest darks to my lighter values for just blocking in an average value map. Then I go in with more finishing paint once I have my values established. Then I go from the sky to the foreground. I put in my more finished opaque paint in the sky and then work back to the foreground, keeping those values that I established and refining them as I go. That's angles and consequent values in a nutshell. There's lots of different caveats, nuances, all that stuff. But that is the fundamental principle that you have to understand and comprehend and adhere to in most cases when you're painting a landscape, if you want it to look like the landscape.